The sun over the southern Spain airbase was already punishing by mid-morning, its heat pressing down on the concrete hard enough to ripple the edges of the ramp. Mirage 2000 stood lined in perfect geometry, canopies gleaming like polished glass, every wingtip shadow sharp against the tarmac. Crew chiefs moved between birds with focused rhythm, checking tags, calling out numbers, flipping panels with practiced ease. Overhead, a single fighter screamed into climb, its afterburner folding into the bright sky like a slash of flame swallowed by light. Toward the far end of the line, away from the water jugs and flight line chatter, sat a different aircraft, an F-14. Dust clung to its fuselage in streaks, gathering especially thick around the tail number, where one corner of the stencil had begun to peel. A tarp, half draped over the left wing, stirred in the hot breeze, its tie loose. The plane didn't shimmer like the rest. It absorbed light, dulled by years and sun and silence. Elena stood beside it, motionless. Her flight suit bore no patch. The fabric was faded at the seams, sleeves pushed to the elbow in quiet defiance of regulation. A pair of gloves hung from her belt, worn at the knuckles, one fingertip threadbare. She didn't check her watch. She didn't shift her weight. She just stood, eyes steady on the prep zone where pilots gathered, already half laughing, half reading their assignments off the display board posted outside the command shelter. The board was new, its screen bright even in the glare. Call signs and aircraft tail numbers rolled across the columns in pale green text. Laurent's name blinked second from the top. Mirage 2, paired with a clean-logged jet, 76 hours since its last sim kill. His shoulders were relaxed, his smile precise, practiced. The kind of grin that played well in photographs. He leaned on the nose strut of his Mirage, casually stretching his arms as another pilot called something about sweep altitude. Someone asked about the F-14 parked by the fence line. Laurent glanced sideways, shielding his eyes. That old thing still runs?" His tone was light, drawling, amused. A junior beside him tilted his head. "Thought it was a static trainer. Maybe someone's doing a throwback reel." A third added, low enough to sound private but loud enough to carry, "She's probably sim tech. Or maintenance." Elena didn't respond. Her posture didn't shift. She hadn't moved in several minutes. One of the loadmasters had passed her earlier without recognition, waving a clipboard while announcing that Mirage pre-checks were cleared through Gate 8. She hadn't corrected him. She'd simply turned, walked back to the aircraft, and rested her hand on the edge of the intake cowling like it meant something. The heat deepened, dense and pulsing. One Mirage mechanic rolled a hydraulic cart across the asphalt, its wheels clicking rhythmically. Another crew started up the checklist callouts for wing calibration. Somewhere further down the strip, a pair of engines fired. The roar echoed off the hangar walls, then disappeared into open air. The day was already in motion. Elena remained just outside its frame. No one had addressed her by name, not once. Inside the tented operation station, the flight board rotated again. 10 brackets, all filled. No mention of her. No notation for the F-14. The command lead didn't call her number during roll. The Mirage team was already zipping their suits to the collar, high-fiving with gloved palms, strapping on their helmets in slow, deliberate cadence. Laurent passed by on his way to the debrief cart, carrying his visor case tucked under one arm. He paused for a second near the tarp-covered F-14. His shadow landed just short of Elena's boots. "Hope they're not sending you up in that. It'd be a shame to call the fire crew before coffee." His voice carried no malice, only polish. He was already looking past her before the sentence finished. Elena met his gaze only for a moment. Not long enough to challenge, just long enough to confirm she heard him. Then she looked back at the wing, resting her hand near the flap guide pin. Laurent gave a short, amused exhale. Good luck with the nostalgia tour. He walked on. A clipboard tech walked the outer line with a portable scanner, checking tail codes against the manifest. He slowed when he reached the F-14 but didn't scan it. No barcode, no assignment, no flight card clipped under the panel. He didn't ask questions, just kept moving. Elena pulled her gloves off her belt and turned them over in her hands. The leather creased softly. She didn't put them on. She didn't walk away either. She waited. The Mirage crews formed two lines along the tarmac edge, prepping for pre-flight check. Someone passed out hydration packs. Another pilot snapped a photo near the nose of a jet, catching Laurent in the corner of the frame. Laughter rose in quiet waves. Comfortable and certain, none of it reached the edge of the ramp. Far behind them, where the heat shimmer made outlines blur, Elena's F-14 stayed still. The tarp rustled slightly, one corner lifting, then settling again. No one photographed it. No one marked its position. But Elena did. In her head. She logged the wind. The burn pattern near the canopy. The shade line slipping under the fuselage. The board updated again. She wasn't on it. Still. She didn't move. Her gloves were still in her hand. Her boots still planted. And the F-14 faded and half forgotten, waited quietly beside her. By the time the last Mirage had been towed under cover and the briefing tents zipped shut, the ramp had gone still. Dusk settled over the airfield in layered blues and soft gray, pressing a hush into the concrete. The temperature had dropped just enough to feel the change. The sound of distant cicadas buzzed faintly from the dry hills beyond the base fence. In the silence, the F-14 remained unmoved, its silhouette dark against the glow from the nearby floodlights that didn't quite reach its parking spot. Elena walked the edge of the runway slowly, her boots making no sound on the painted lines. She held her kneeboard in one hand, the paper creased and soft at the folds, its topographic overlay marked with a single pencil line running north to south. The ink on the corners had faded from sun exposure. She traced the route with her eyes, imagining the canyon's rise and drop, the torque it would take to bank over the final ridge, and the slipstream that would pull too wide if the angle wasn't perfect. Inside the tent nearest to the ops board, voices still murmured. Someone called out coordinates. Someone else laughed about a wingman who overshot a simulated lock by 4 seconds. Elena didn't stop walking. She passed the tents without glancing in. She had not been called for briefing. She would not be called for planning. She knew that already. She reached the southern line of the tarmac where the fuel trucks had stopped running and the wind from the valley swept in low. The light here was sparse, broken into long stripes by the hangar's slatted wall. Her F-14 sat in profile under the ribs of the roof, tail angled slightly west. The panel seams caught a faint sheen of engine oil where the morning sun had left streaks. Elena stepped around the left stabilizer and climbed onto the forward ladder with quiet precision. Her hand caught the edge of the cockpit rim as if by muscle memory. The canopy was still open. She stepped down into the seat, adjusted nothing, and let herself sit. Not in command, not in training, just in place. The leather seat had warmed slightly from the day and then cooled with the air. It smelled like sealed metal, old plastic, and the last hydraulic flush. The smell hadn't changed in years. She set the kneeboard on her lap. Her grease pencil, still unused, rested behind her ear. She didn't reach for it. Her left hand moved to the throttle, not to grip it, but to feel its shape. The tape she had wound around the base 6 years ago now was still in place, barely holding. She closed her eyes and did not move. In her head, she ran the corridor entry at 100.0 meters above ground level, banking right and bleeding velocity until the Mirage would have to commit to the overshoot. The F-14 around her made no sound, but it did not feel empty. It held an echo, a trace of former flight. The canopy frame bore a fingerprint smudge she had never wiped. The edge of the center console had a small scar from when a panel wrench had been dropped. Years back. She could still feel the rhythm of the startup sequence in her knuckles, even though she did not reach for the controls now. No one interrupted her. No one came looking. Farther out on the flight line, the Mirage crews continued their prep inside pools of artificial light. Elena remained in shadow. By design. She stayed in the cockpit as the night deepened. The kneeboard stayed on her lap. The map remained untouched. The pencil never moved. At some point, a wind current shifted, sending a soft hiss through the hangar slats. She opened her eyes, leaned forward, and scanned the ridgeline that sat just beyond the north boundary fence. Tomorrow. That would be the first turn. Tomorrow. That line would decide the split. She finally stepped down from the cockpit after nearly an hour. She didn't check her watch. She returned to the rear of the hangar and folded the kneeboard along the original creases, then slid it into the side panel of a ground kit that no one else used. The tarp still hung half loose from the wing. She adjusted the edge without pulling it tight. Years ago, they had said she failed to respond fast enough to a misread lock-on during a qualifying match over Southern water. The review board called it indecision. She remembered it differently. The warning light had flickered. Not activated flickered. And she had waited. Counting breath. Waiting to confirm before breaking left. The instructor had pulled override. The report used the phrase, hesitation under pressure. Since then, no board had listed her on primary rotation. Her call sign faded from the logs. Her name moved to tech support. No one had revoked her wings, but no one had asked her to fly again. Until the board posted a blank slot this morning. Now she moved like she never left. She checked the chocks on the main gear, not because she had to, but because it was part of her ritual. 2 fingers under the edge. Firm. No rock. She walked back across the concrete, her path deliberately outside the cone of light from the central tower. The ground under her boots held stored heat from the day, but the sky had gone fully dark. Above, the stars came out in partial clarity, shimmered by the wind above the hills. No moon yet. Inside one tent, someone shouted something about heat-sig masking. Elena didn't slow. She passed them without pause, without recognition. She could have spoken. She had been trained by the same instructors. She had scored higher on radar lock sims than most of the men in that room, but she wasn't asked, and she wouldn't interrupt. Silence was not absence. Silence was choice. By first light, the airbase had begun to stir like a hive coming to life. Boots struck the pavement in short bursts, voices carried between hangars, and the drone of a fuel cart echoed faintly against the corrugated walls. One of the Mirage 2000s fired up a short test cycle, its twin engines rising in tempo before settling into idle. Vapor trails shimmered behind a row of wing pylons freshly wiped clean by ground crew. The scent of jet fuel hung low, metallic and acrid, curling through the heat that had not yet fully formed. In the center of the prep zone, a laminated board displayed the morning's flight brackets. 10 matchups, 9 confirmed, 1 gap, marked in orange, blinking slowly. No one seemed worried. Technical issues were common, especially with a cross-decked aircraft borrowed from a training squadron the night before. A Mirage pilot named Keene had scratched during his control check. Air pressure misread on the port intake, not repairable before slot time. Command staff huddled, quietly discussing backup options. Elena's name was never spoken aloud. She received the notice secondhand. A clipboard was dropped on a folding table outside the hangar. On the back page, in dry marker, a line read, Substitute, F-14 dustlock. No initials, no bio. Just an empty call sign from a long inactive registry. She picked it up without comment and nodded once to the tech who had left it there. He didn't look back. The Mirage crews were already in gear, helmets strapped at the ready, flight suits sealed at the collar. Laurent stood near his bird, visor case open on the cart, reviewing his SIM card loadout with the casual confidence of someone who expected a clean victory. His Mirage had been detailed to perfection. A new decal sleek silver tail stripes caught the early light as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He scanned the prep list, then glanced across the tarmac. His eyes caught Elena walking toward the F-14. He didn't need a second look to recognize her. You've got to be kidding," he said, loud enough for the nearby crew to hear. "They're sending the antique thought we were flying, not filming a documentary." A few of the others laughed, low and sharp. One of them nudged his shoulder and added, "Maybe she's here for radar calibration. Get that Cold War nostalgia on the books." Elena said nothing. She didn't look at them. She reached the side of the F-14 and placed one hand against the fuselage, just below the air intake. Her helmet hung by its strap from her other wrist, unmarked and matte, the outer shell dulled by time and use. No stickers, no kill tape. The visor had been cleaned the night before, but the corner still showed light scuffing where it had knocked against the canopy frame in older turns. She set the helmet down, opened the side panel, and retrieved a laminated airspace card. It had yellowed slightly along the edges. The ink faded at the corners. She folded it once and tucked it into the chest pocket of her flight suit. Then she took a breath, pulled her gloves from her belt, and slid her hands into them with methodical calm. Her thumbs caught under the wrist straps. She pulled tight. Laurent raised a hand in mock salute as she stepped onto the ladder. "Try not to stall during the climb. It's embarrassing when we have to reset the kill count for charity." Another pilot chuckled. The tone was casual, confident. The joke was intended to bounce off her. No one seemed to notice she had never responded to any of them. Inside the cockpit, Elena checked the trim manually. Her fingers moved with steady rhythm. She flipped each switch without pause. No checklist on her knee, only instinct. She tapped the canopy seal with the side of her hand, then rolled her wrist once to feel the torque in her left glove. Outside, the flight line cleared as the command tower gave final confirmation for Bracket 7. Laurent's Mirage, powered up. A voice crackled over the internal channel. "Dust lock. You are green for throttle prep. Airspace clear. SIM-tag enabled." She responded with a simple, "Copy, set and confirmed." No one welcomed her to the bracket. No one read her briefing, but the clearance tone chimed just the same. The ramp began to shift into launch order. First pair rolled out, then second. Elena stayed still in the cockpit, the hum of the systems wrapping around her like a second skin. Her grip on the throttle was light. The aircraft felt balanced under her boots. The left pedal gave slightly when pressed. A mechanic walked past, glanced once at her tailcode, and kept moving. No nod, no words. She checked the visor once more, lowered it, and settled into the seat. On her right, Laurent's Mirage eased into its taxi line with a flourish, its exhaust curling into the morning haze. He didn't look back. She didn't expect him to. But in the tower, one of the supervisors adjusted his headset slightly, then leaned toward the controller beside him. "Did she just say dust lock?" The younger controller blinked. "Yeah, why?" The supervisor didn't answer right away. He just tapped the screen and watched the icon flicker into place. Back on the ramp, the F-14's turbines began to cycle, the twin engines humming low as the aircraft came to life. Elena adjusted her shoulder harness, rolled her neck once, and waited for the wheel chocks to clear. The slot had not been offered, but it was open. She didn't need the invitation. The drill began with a clear tone from control and a line of white across the upper airspace, drawn fast and high by the Mirage. Laurent came in with altitude already banked, nose down slightly as if claiming the space before Elena had a chance to rise into it. The Mirage, 2000, moved like it had been waiting for this. Its design made for speed and bite, its wings cut narrow and light, a flash of graphite and sun-glinting paint against the soft haze of early thermals. Elena didn't follow. She lifted steady from the runway, her F-14 climbing slow and wide, holding just under the altitude cap. Her hands on the controls were still. The taped groove under her index finger on the throttle marked her tension without movement. She kept her nose level through the first sweep and let the Mirage shoot past overhead, angling into the simulated combat zone ahead of her. The ridge terrain began to form underneath. Long arcs of rock sloped into shallow ravines, rising again into sharp shoulders of desert red and brown. Heat shimmer blurred the lower edges, making the landscape look like it breathed. The exercise boundaries shimmered on her radar overlay, but Elena didn't watch them. She knew the corridor already, drawn from memory on the kneeboard she had folded twice and left back in the prep rack. Laurent called in first contact. His voice was crisp, clipped with confidence. Mirage 3, visual on Tomcat at lower left arc, moving to intercept. No response from Elena, just a mild bank, right into the shadow of the first ridgeline. Her wingtips skimmed the low sun angle, then vanished behind a contour that broke her outline to anyone watching from overhead. The Mirage moved quickly, almost too quickly. Laurent descended hard, angled to box her in from above. The maneuver was aggressive, practiced, sharp. He was used to this zone, used to training kills. His Mirage handled like a blade in his hands. It snapped left, then climbed briefly. Diving again in a wide arc meant to force an upward reaction. Elena didn't rise. She dipped instead, pulling her F-14 under the low shelf of the western ridge. Her altitude dropped cleanly to 200 feet, the valley floor opening ahead like a track she had already flown in her mind 100 times. The F-14 responded slower than the Mirage, heavier, but more grounded. The wings flexed as the terrain buffeted the airflow, the entire structure moving as if adjusting to a rhythm the Mirage couldn't hear. She skimmed the contour at a glide angle that favored width, not speed. The dust lifted faintly behind her, pulled into feathered vortices. She didn't touch the afterburner. She didn't speak. Laurent overshot again. He called back, still visual, moving to flank position. She's holding low. He sounded almost puzzled now. The drill was set for open sky, high angles. No one flew the ridge unless they had to. The Mirage wasn't built to follow low. Its strength came in snap angles, instant reversals, vertical speed. But Elena never turned sharply. She turned with the ground. Inside her cockpit, the hum of the F-14's turbines merged with the terrain's texture. She adjusted her yaw with her left foot only, tapping lightly on the rudder. Her thumb hovered just over the trim toggle. The tape on her throttle flexed under the pressure of her fingertip, fitting into the groove she had worn into it after years of habit. She glanced once toward the right side window. The canyon wall beside her flicked past like a slow current, not an obstacle. She shifted her course slightly, letting the upper shelf of rock blot the sunlight behind her. Laurent circled above, trying to reacquire. His Mirage banked too hard on the last turn and lost trim for a second. It corrected fast, but the arc had widened. He pulled back into range and initiated radar sweep. His voice again. Lock pending. Stand by for confirm. The tone in the control room changed. Someone called out a time mark. No visual lock registered. Elena did not appear on his sweep. She had dropped further, down into the corridor's center seam, and slipped behind a formation of jagged stone that had no true altitude signature. The radar signal bounced too wide. She let the Mirage pass overhead again, this time holding a breath. The canopy dimmed slightly from the sun blur as the other aircraft crossed. Then silence returned. In her mind, Elena saw the turn coming long, flat, and smooth, coiling out toward the final bend before the cap return boundary. She let the F-14 pull through the angle at 70% throttle, not rushing, not falling behind. No flare, no climb. Just glide and shape. She had flown this pattern on paper until the fold lines went white. Now she flew it in steel. Laurent came over the comms again. No contact. Rescanning. Confirming sector. He was searching now. He wasn't in control anymore. Elena adjusted one switch. The radar stayed quiet. Her hands stayed steady. She didn't need the system to tell her where he was. She could feel it in the shape of the sky above, the delay in his sweep. He was circling blind. The F-14 pulled into position, quiet and smooth, behind the final outcrop. The wind shifted slightly, brushing the underside of the aircraft as if guiding it toward the next move. Laurent's Mirage dropped altitude again, trying to reacquire. His jet rocked in turbulence, the wings twitching under pressure. He called it in. Still no lock. Advise sweep reset. Dust lock has vanished. The word echoed once in the channel. Vanished. Back on the field, one of the junior flight staff leaned toward the control board, watching the replay delay buffer. He blinked. She disappeared on purpose, he said softly. She knew the Mirage would lose track in the drop shadow. No one answered him. Elena banked gently to the right. Still no tone. Still no call. But now Laurent was hunting, and she was not the one being seen. The canyon narrowed as the sun shifted west, dragging long shadows across the valley floor. Heat shimmer softened the horizon, but the ridgelines stayed sharp. The Mirage arced overhead again, its wings tilting with urgency that hadn't been there before. Each pass came tighter now, the margins closer. The drill clock ticked past midpoint. No lock had been called. Laurent's voice came through the comms, clipped and sharp, still scanning. Advise visual contact lost. She's hugging terrain like she's hiding in it. No answer from Elena. She banked left into a hollow near the canyon's bend, letting the F-14 glide downward just beneath a natural overhang. Her throttle dropped back, one notch below standard, the engines whispering as they adjusted airflow. The Mirage passed above again. He was flying fast, too fast. His turns were clean but too wide, reactive. His radar sweep pinged every few seconds, but the signal was unfocused. He had lost the rhythm. Elena let her hand rest lightly on the trim toggle, her fingers barely brushing the surface. The tape under her index finger held steady against the throttle grip. She didn't climb. Not yet. Laurent called again, this time louder. You still airborne? Dust lock. Or are we logging this as a no-show? The silence that followed felt heavier than static. Inside her cockpit, Elena studied the ridge ahead, not for targets, but for shadow density. The sun hit the canyon's edge at an angle now, creating a single vertical wall of glare that would blind any upward glance. She dipped lower, just enough to disappear under it. Then she pulled back. The F-14 responded without hesitation. Its nose rose slowly, the wings catching the updraft as the terrain dropped away behind her. She didn't gun the engines. She let momentum carry her through the curve, an invisible loop wide enough to form a shallow arc behind the Mirage's last turn. The movement was slow, deliberate, written in advance. Laurent would not see it until it was finished. From above, the Mirage circled hard right. His flight path cut across the mouth of the canyon like a blade, but the angle was too sharp. He overshot again. His tail dipped slightly as he corrected. On the ground, one of the control room techs leaned toward the radar monitor. She's behind him, he said softly. In the drill observation bay, instructors began to gather. No one spoke. Laurent started a climb to regain separation, banking left with enough force to bleed airspeed. He pulled tighter than protocol allowed, risking a stall to flush her from cover. The Mirage's engines screamed through the shift. That was the cue. Elena's F-14 emerged from behind the ridge. Not fast, but perfectly placed. Her vector came up from below and behind, using the terrain's blind edge as a veil. The climb completed with no wasted motion. She held the angle steady. Her targeting system blinked to life. Inside her headset, the lock tone chirped once. Sharp, clean. She did not adjust her course. She didn't need to. The Mirage flashed in her canopy view, crossing just enough for a tail lock. The reticle glowed. Fox 2, she said. The words landed like punctuation. A half-second later, the training system responded. Target confirmed. Kill registered. Elena's channel blinked green. The Mirage's display flipped to passive. Simulated trail smoke deployed from the pod under Laurent's wing, curling in a graceful arc behind him like a white ribbon across the sky. Silence filled the comms. Laurent didn't speak. The tone of his aircraft changed. Even from distance, the Mirage looked smaller now, its movement dulled. It banked gently away, following the return vector with mechanical compliance. Elena didn't follow. She eased her throttle back, steadying her altitude. Her hands remained on the controls, but there was no more adjustment needed. The drill was done. Down on the tarmac, One of the Mirage crew members stepped out of the observation tent, helmet in hand, his expression unreadable. A younger tech played the kill confirmation loop on a secondary screen, watching the lock angle appear from behind the terrain fold. It was clean, no flare, no scramble, just geometry and timing. In the control tower, someone whispered. She set it up 10 seconds earlier. He never saw it coming. The vapor trail behind the Mirage lingered for a few seconds longer before dissolving into the haze. It curled slightly at the top, a soft hook that marked the moment the lock had landed, like a signature made in flight. Elena kept the F-14 level. She didn't adjust her heading. She didn't reply to the kill confirm tone. She just flew forward, letting the jet settle into the silence that now stretched across every channel. The field below stayed quiet. The observers didn't move. The board had not yet updated. But the story was already sealed in the smoke. The light had changed by the time Elena brought the F-14 back down. The sky stretched wide in shades of bronze and violet, and the heat from the day had finally begun to break. Wind moved across the tarmac in quiet, dry gusts, carrying the smell of fuel and dust and something older. The aircraft settled with a soft creak as its weight met solid ground. No crowd waited. No camera crews. Just long shadows and the metallic groan of cooling steel. She taxied to the far edge of the ramp, near where she had begun that morning. The other jets had already been wheeled back into their bays. Her parking spot remained unchanged, half forgotten, just outside the line of regular maintenance lanes. The F-14's tires rolled over the same faded strip of concrete as earlier, the same patchwork stain under the left wheel well. She guided the aircraft into position, without hesitation. When she powered down, the engines wound to silence with a smooth, familiar whine. She opened the canopy herself. The hiss of the release valve echoed briefly, then vanished into the open space. No one moved toward her. No flags. No headsets. No checklist barked over comms. She removed her helmet slowly, then reached down to unclip her harness. Her gloves stayed on until her boots hit the ground. Dust lifted as she stepped down from the ladder. The earth seemed quieter than before, more aware. A technician from the Mirage crew approached with a water bottle in one hand, stopping about 3 paces away. He offered it wordlessly. Elena looked at it, then gave a polite nod and kept walking. He didn't take it personally. Inside the observation trailer, 2 instructors stood over the feed playback system. The lock sequence replayed in a loop on one of the side monitors, Elena's F-14 rising into position behind Laurent's Mirage. The kill confirmed. The vapor trail curling. One of the instructors had his arms folded. The other just kept rewinding the footage to the moment the Mirage lost her. She knew exactly where the brake line was. The first one said, almost to himself, it wasn't luck. Across the compound, Laurent sat on a metal step beside a service truck, helmet resting next to his knee. His eyes stayed fixed on the handheld screen replaying the lock confirmation. He didn't speak, didn't frown. He watched the clip through twice, then paused it at the moment. The F-14 climbed into view, grainy against the terrain. His thumb hovered over the rewind button, but he didn't press it again. Elena passed him on her way back toward the lockers. He didn't say anything as she walked by, but this time, he didn't look away. Inside the low metal building marked temporary personnel. The overhead light flickered once before settling. Her locker was on the end row. The tag still read, temporary access, Elena, no rank, no unit, no nameplate. She opened it quietly. No one else was in the room. From the inside pocket of her flight bag, she removed a small cassette case, rectangular and unadorned, edges dulled with wear. The label on the front read, in fine black ink, 9.6, full sweep, manual only. Below that, along the corner, written in smaller handwriting, the words curved at a slant angle first. Throttle last, always turn second. She placed the tape carefully on the upper shelf, beside a folded maintenance cloth and a pair of unused flight logs. She did not pause to reflect. She did not close the locker slowly. On the way out, she carried her helmet by the chin strap, letting it swing gently against her leg. The scuffs along its surface caught the dying light. Not enough to gleam, just enough to be seen. No squadron stickers marked its shell. No name had ever been stenciled on the side. The path between the hangars had emptied. Only the echo of the last generator hum remained, distant and low. Elena walked toward the western edge of the field, where the sky stretched wide and empty. She didn't head to the tower. She didn't wait for the debrief. She had nothing left to add. Behind her, the Mirage team stayed quiet. One of them leaned against the trailer door, watching her go. Another adjusted the screen angle and replayed the sim one more time. She flew it slow. Someone murmured, like she had all the time in the world. No one laughed. No one disagreed. The tape remained in the locker, unlabeled to anyone else. But its message was clear. It was not recorded for others. It was left for the machine that had understood her. She was never called forward, never celebrated, never invited to speak. And yet, she flew. In a world where loud confidence often outruns quiet mastery, Elena proved that preparation does not need permission. Her strength was not in bravado, but in presence. In the way she read the terrain, trusted her craft, and held to her course long after others stopped watching. This was never about recognition. It was about rhythm, precision, and the kind of self-worth that doesn't wait to be named. For anyone who has ever stood at the edge, overlooked or underestimated, her story is a reminder being unseen is not the same as being unready. If this story moved you, leave a thought in the comments. Share it with someone who walks their own quiet path, and follow for more stories of quiet power, unshakable presence, and the victories that speak for themselves.